Amara had learned a long time ago that danger had a smell. Not blood, not gunpowder. Those came after. What came before was subtler, a kind of stillness that didn't belong. The way a room held its breath without knowing why. She had first noticed it in a precinct stairwell in Detroit, 3 seconds before everything went wrong. She noticed it now. Standing in the Onyx Lounge kitchen doorway with a tray of untouched champagne flutes balanced on her palm. She paused. The kitchen behind her was loud, pots clanging. The chef barking orders, the hiss of something hitting a hot pan. The lounge ahead was its usual self. Soft gold lighting, low music, the gentle clink of expensive glasses. Men in tailored suits laughed at things that weren't funny. Women draped in silk looked bored in beautiful ways. Nothing was wrong. Except something was. Her eyes moved to the convex mirror mounted above the kitchen entrance, a wide, curved disc of glass that management had installed so servers could avoid collisions in the narrow corridor. Most of the staff barely noticed it anymore. Amara noticed it every single night. Old habits didn't die. They just went quiet and waited. The mirror showed her the hallway that ran along the back of the lounge toward the VIP wing. And in that hallway, there were 2 men who did not work there. She didn't stare. She gave them 3 seconds, the maximum a trained eye needed, then looked away. 3 seconds was enough. The first man was lean and controlled, dressed in a dark suit that fit too well to be rented. His red tie sat perfectly straight. He walked close to the wall, not down the center of the corridor the way lost guests did. He wasn't looking at room numbers. He wasn't looking at his phone. His eyes moved in a pattern, left, right, ahead, the same quiet scan she had used herself during active duty. He wasn't exploring. He was clearing. The second man was bigger. White shirt, collar open, sleeves pushed to the elbow. A tattoo spread across the right side of his neck and disappeared beneath the fabric. His hands were loose at his sides, fingers slightly curved. Ready hands. The kind that had closed around things before and were comfortable doing it again. Amara set the tray down on the nearest counter. A passing server shot her a look. She ignored it. Her brain was already moving faster than her body. In her years with the tactical unit, she had studied how professional hit teams operated. They never rushed. They arrived early, mapped the space, neutralized the edges before moving to the center. The 2 men in the mirror weren't rushing, which meant they were already past the early steps. They had already been inside the building long enough to feel comfortable, long enough to know the layout, which meant the hit wasn't coming. It was already happening. She pressed her back against the kitchen wall and thought for exactly 4 seconds, a luxury she almost didn't allow herself. Romano was in the VIP room. She had served him herself 40 minutes ago. Bourbon neat. He had not looked at her, the way powerful men rarely looked at the people handing them things. He was surrounded by 2 of his own men, both of whom were stationed outside the VIP door in the corridor. She glanced back at the mirror. The corridor was empty now. The 2 men had already moved past the mirror's range. The cold that moved through her chest wasn't fear. She had made peace with fear a long time ago. It was something sharper, the specific, focused chill of a mind switching from civilian to something older and more dangerous. Her body remembered what her life had tried to make it forget. Weight shifted to the balls of her feet. Breathing slowed and deepened. The noise of the kitchen faded to a low hum behind everything else. She thought about Romano's 2 guards posted at the VIP door. She thought about the fact that she had walked that corridor 6 minutes ago, and both men had been standing exactly where they were supposed to be. She thought about the fact that they were not there anymore. And then Amara stopped thinking and started moving. She found the first guard in the service alcove beside the linen cart. He was sitting against the wall with his chin on his chest. The way a man sits when sleep takes him without warning. His earpiece had been removed and placed neatly on the floor beside his right knee. As if someone had been careful about it. As if someone had not wanted it to make noise when it fell. His radio was gone entirely. Amara crouched beside him and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was steady and slow. Not dead. Sedated. Something fast-acting. Delivered cleanly enough that the man hadn't even had time to reach for his weapon. His hand was still resting open on his thigh, relaxed. The way hands only looked when the mind behind them had been switched off without warning. Professional work. She straightened up and moved to the next position. The second guard was around the corner near the fire exit, slumped in his chair with his jacket pulled slightly forward, covering the small dart mark she found on the left side of his neck when she checked. Same clean delivery. Same careful removal of his communication equipment. Same deliberate, unhurried precision. These men had not been beaten. They had not been threatened or rushed. They had been removed from the equation the way a chess player removes a piece, quietly, efficiently, without emotion. Whoever had done this had either gotten very close to these men without raising suspicion, or these men had allowed someone close enough to do it. Amara stood in the corridor and felt the shape of the truth before she was ready to hold it. She had been in enough operations to know that sedating 2 trained guards in a secured private corridor was not something a stranger could do. Not without a struggle. Not without noise. You didn't walk up to a man whose entire job was suspicion and put him to sleep unless he trusted you enough to let his guard drop first. Or unless someone he trusted had already told him to stand down. Her jaw tightened. Romano's men hadn't been overpowered. They had been betrayed from the inside. Someone on Romano's own team had opened the door. Not a literal door, but the kind that mattered more. The kind made of trust and access, and the quiet permission that came from a familiar face. Someone had told these guards that tonight was routine, that the men in the corridor were expected, that there was no reason to reach for the radio. Amara moved back toward the main corridor, keeping close to the wall, staying out of the sight lines from both ends. Her mind was sorting through what she knew the way she used to sort intelligence reports, pulling the relevant pieces forward, setting the noise aside. Kang Min-jae. She hadn't spoken that name in 3 years, but she had thought it. Not often. Just on the nights when she couldn't sleep, and the darkness of her apartment felt too much like the darkness of the stairwell in Detroit. She had first come across his operation buried in a report she was never officially supposed to see. A shadow network that moved through the gaps between organized crime families, offering clean, untraceable removal services to clients wealthy enough to afford silence. They didn't advertise. They didn't make mistakes. They didn't leave witnesses. She was currently standing between them and their target. The VIP door was visible at the end of the corridor, heavy mahogany, brass handle. A small gold plate engraved with the word private. Behind it, Romano was almost certainly still reclined in his velvet chair, laughing at something. Untouched bourbon warming to room temperature on the table beside him. Unaware. Amara counted the seconds she had left and didn't like the number she arrived at. There was no time to find help she could trust, because she didn't know yet who that was. There was no time to warn Romano through his own people, because his own people were either unconscious or compromised. There was no alarm she could pull that wouldn't accelerate the timeline and push Kong into moving faster than she could manage. There was only the door, and the key still sitting in her apron pocket, and the part of herself she had spent 3 years trying to bury, rising now to the surface like something that had never agreed to drown in the first place. She walked toward the door. She heard them before she saw them. Not footsteps. The carpet was too thick for that. It was something else. The faint shift of fabric. The particular silence of men who had learned to move without announcing themselves. It came from the left corridor junction, the one that fed in from the kitchen's secondary exit, and it was moving toward her with the calm, steady rhythm of people who believed they still had time. Amara stopped walking. She was 12 feet from the VIP door. They were 20 feet from the corridor junction. The math was not comfortable. She turned her body slightly, enough to see without appearing to look. The red tie appeared first, catching the warm light of the wall lamp like a flag. Then the dark suit. Then the white shirt and the tattoos and the heavy, rolling shoulders of the enforcer moving half a step behind. There were 3 of them now. She hadn't seen the third man in the mirror. He was shorter, older, wearing a gray jacket, and he moved with the careful precision of someone whose job was to watch the edges while the others moved to the center. They hadn't seen her yet. She was just a waitress in a black uniform, standing in a corridor with a tray. Invisible. Forgettable. Exactly what 3 years of deliberate smallness had trained the world to see when they looked at her. She used it. Her hand found the tray's edge, and she turned back toward the kitchen junction as if she were simply returning to work, keeping her pace unhurried, giving them nothing to react to. But her eyes had already measured the corridor, already mapped the distance, already calculated what she needed and how many seconds she had to get it done. The answer was not many. She reached the corner, turned into the kitchen-side hall, and the moment the angle of the wall covered her from their sight line, everything changed. Her posture dropped and tightened at the same time, shoulders forward, weight low. The body she had spent years softening into invisibility, snapping back into the shape it had been built for. She gripped the tray in both hands and walked back around the corner into the main corridor. Kang Min-jae looked up and saw her. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. His eyes took her in the way trained eyes did, quickly, completely, assigning categories. Waitress. Civilian. Not a threat. She watched the assessment move across his face, and knew she had one moment before the next assessment began. She threw the tray. Not at him. Sideways, hard. Into the tall glass display cabinet mounted on the corridor wall. The tray hit the cabinet's edge, and the glasses on top exploded downward, a sudden, violent crash of shattering crystal that tore through the lounge's careful quiet like a gunshot. From inside the main room came shouts, the scrape of chairs. The immediate chaos of wealthy people startled out of their comfort. Amara was already running. She went straight down the center of the corridor, arms driving, head down, covering the 12 feet to the VIP door in the time it took Kang to process that the waitress was not standing still anymore. Behind her she heard the enforcer's sharp exhale, surprise, then fury, and the heavy thud of his first running step on the carpeted floor. She hit the door with her left shoulder, hand already at her apron, fingers closing around the key. Her training had always said that fine motor skills collapsed under pressure. Her training had been right. Her hands were shaking. She felt it in the way the key scraped the plate around the lock before finding the slot. The enforcer's footsteps were getting louder. She didn't look back. Looking back was for people who had the luxury of extra seconds. The key turned. The bolt slid with a sound so small and so final that she felt it more than heard it. A single mechanical click that sealed the corridor on one side and whatever chance Romano had on the other. She spun and pressed her back against the door, both palms flat on the wood behind her, and faced the corridor. Kang Min-jae stopped 4 feet away. The enforcer stopped beside him, chest heaving, eyes dark with something that wasn't quite anger yet, but was building toward it fast. The third man covered the far end of the corridor without being asked. Kang looked at her, really looked. This time, and the careful blankness of his face shifted into something more dangerous than anger. Curiosity. Nobody moved. The corridor held the three of them in a strange, stretched quiet, Kang at the center, the enforcer to his right, the gray-jacketed man at the far end sealing the exit. The shattered glass from the display cabinet glittered on the carpet between them like scattered teeth. From inside the lounge, the confused noise of startled guests was already settling back into murmur. The jazz had not stopped playing. It filtered through the walls, soft and indifferent, as if nothing had happened at all. Kang's curiosity lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then he nodded. The enforcer moved. He came fast for a big man, not charging, not reckless, but direct and committed, the way men moved when they had done this before and knew that hesitation cost more than speed. Amara had maybe 2 full seconds before his weight reached the door. She used the first one to drop her shoulder and drive herself backward, planting both feet wide on the carpet, back flat against the mahogany. She used the second one to grab the brass door handle with both hands and pull it toward her body with everything she had. He hit the door like a wave hitting a wall. The impact traveled up through her arms and into her spine, and she felt her heels drag an inch on the carpet before she caught herself. The wood groaned. The handle bucked against her grip. She locked her elbows, bent her knees lower, redistributed her weight the way she had been taught in a training room that felt like a different lifetime. Load through the legs, not the back. Let the skeleton carry what the muscles can't. He hit it again. This time she was ready. She absorbed the shock without moving, and she heard him on the other side make a short, frustrated sound that told her he had expected the door to give and was recalculating because it hadn't. Good. Let him recalculate. Every second he spent adjusting was a second she still had the door. Kang's voice came from the corridor, calm and unhurried. You are confused about your situation. Amara said nothing. Talking cost breath and breath was something she was managing carefully right now. You are a waitress, he continued. This is not your problem. Step away from the door and walk out through the kitchen. Nobody will stop you. The enforcer hit the door a third time, throwing his full weight into it, and this time Amara felt something in her left shoulder flare hot and sharp. She bit down on the pain and held. Her arms were beginning to burn. Her legs were steady, but her lungs were working harder than she wanted them to. She was strong, but she was one person, and the man on the other side of the door was large and angry, and had the advantage of momentum. She needed to change the equation. Without releasing the handle, she turned her head toward the room behind her and raised her voice to a sharp, carrying level that cut through the jazz and the residual noise of the lounge crowd. Romano, there are 3 men in the corridor. Your guards are down. This door is the only thing between you and a professional hit team. Silence from inside the room. Then the sound of a chair moving. Then footsteps, 2 sets. Romano's men inside, whoever was left. Kang's voice in the corridor changed. Still calm, but tighter now. The patience in it wearing thinner at the edges. That was a mistake. The enforcer stopped throwing himself at the door. For a moment Amara thought he was stepping back, and she almost made the error of relaxing. Then she heard it, a low, braced exhale. The kind a man let out when he was gathering himself for something bigger than what he had already tried. He hit the door running. The impact was different this time. Not a push, a collision. The frame shuddered. The bolt rattled in its housing with a sound that was not entirely reassuring. Amara's feet left the carpet entirely for one terrible half-second, and she came back down crooked, one knee dropping, shoulder screaming. She did not let go. She pressed her forehead against the wood and breathed and held, and from inside the room she heard the unmistakable, metallic sound of a weapon being readied. Romano was awake now. The bolt held. For now. Amara kept her back against the door and turned to face the room, and found herself looking down the barrel of a gun held by a man who had clearly never pointed one at a waitress before, but was doing it with complete conviction anyway. Romano was standing 6 feet away, jacket off, shirt untucked on one side where he had moved fast. He was bigger than he looked sitting down, broad through the chest, thick in the neck, with the kind of stillness that came not from calm, but from absolute control. His eyes were dark and entirely alert. Whatever Romano was, he was not a man who needed long to wake up. Beside him stood a single guard, younger, with a cut above his eyebrow that was fresh enough to still be bleeding. One of the men from inside the room, not the corridor. He had his weapon up too. 2 guns. 1 waitress. 1 locked door with something very angry on the other side of it. Amara raised both hands slowly, palms forward, and did not move her feet. "My name is Amara Johnson," she said. Her voice was level. She had learned a long time ago that panic was loudest in the voice before it showed anywhere else. 3 years ago, I was a tactical security officer with the Detroit PD Joint Task Force. I was removed from service after filing a corruption report that was buried by people above my rank. I currently work here as a waitress. Tonight I recognized the man in this corridor as Kong Min-jae, who runs a contracted kill operation for a shadow syndicate that you are already familiar with, Mr. Romano. Romano had not lowered the gun. Behind her the door shuddered again. The bolt housing made a sound she didn't like. "Your 2 corridor guards have been sedated," she continued, keeping her voice at the same steady pace, not rushing, not pleading. Rushing sounded like lying. "Your inside security has been compromised at the source, which means someone in your organization opened access to this event. The 3 men in that corridor are professionals. They did not come here to negotiate." Romano's eyes moved over her face with the focused, measuring look of a man who had built a life on reading people quickly and accurately. He was doing it now. She could feel it, the rapid, invisible calculation of whether she was a threat, a tool, or something else entirely. The gun didn't waver. "You locked that door," he said. His voice was deep and even, with an accent that sat somewhere between New York and somewhere older. "Yes." "Why?" It was the right question. Not "who are you" or "how did you get in here?" Why? He already understood the what. He wanted the part underneath it. The part that explained a woman in a waitress uniform making a decision that wasn't hers to make. Amara held his gaze and gave him the only answer that was completely true. "Because I was the only one close enough to do it." The door behind her took another impact. This one cracked something, not the bolt, not the frame, but somewhere in the body of the wood itself. A warning sound. A countdown sound. The young guard's eyes cut to the door and back to Amara, and she saw the fear in him that Romano was not showing. Romano lowered the gun. Not all the way. To his side, fingers still inside the guard, ready. But down. It was enough. "The syndicate," he said. "You know them. I know what they did to my career. I didn't know until tonight that the thread connected to you." Something moved across Romano's face then. Not surprise exactly, but the particular expression of a man, who had just watched two separate things he thought were unrelated touch each other in the dark. He looked at her the way people looked at maps when a road they hadn't noticed suddenly explained why the route had always felt wrong. The door cracked again, louder. "Can you hold that?" Romano asked, nodding toward it. "Not much longer," Amara said honestly. Romano turned to his guard and said two words, quiet and final. The way men spoke when the deciding was already done. "Help her." The guard's name was Dario. She didn't ask. Romano said it when he directed him to the door. A single word of introduction that was also an instruction. Dario was younger than Amara by at least 5 years, with the compact, coiled build of someone who had grown up having to be ready. He took position beside her without question, planting his shoulder against the door's center panel. Feet set wide the way she had hers. The relief on her burning arms was immediate, and she allowed herself one slow breath to reset. Romano moved to the far side of the room and made a call on a phone that appeared from his inside jacket pocket. He spoke quietly with his back turned, which told her the call was either for help or for damage control. Possibly both. Then Kang's voice came through the door. It was the first time she had heard it clearly, without corridor distance between them. It was a measured voice, not loud, not rough, shaped by someone who had learned that volume was for people who needed to be believed. Kang did not need to be believed. He simply needed to be heard. "I want to speak to the woman," he said. Romano looked at Amara from across the room. She nodded once. "I'm here," she said, keeping her shoulder against the wood. A short pause. When Kang spoke again, there was something different in his tone. Not warmth, but a specific kind of attention, the kind given to something that had surprised you. "You moved well in the corridor. Better than a waitress moves." "I've had practice," Amara said. "Yes." Another pause. "Johnson. Amara Johnson. Detroit Tactical. The whistleblower." The name in his mouth felt like a hand going through her pocket. She kept her face still and her voice flat. "You have a good memory." "I have good records," Kang said. "You were removed from service in March, 3 years ago. Your report was classified and your unit was quietly dissolved 6 weeks later. You disappeared after that. I admit I did not expect to find you here. People end up in unexpected places," Amara said. "That's usually someone else's fault." Dario glanced sideways at her. She kept her eyes on the middle distance, listening not just to the words, but to the spaces between them, the way she had been trained to do in interrogation prep. Kang was talking because talking served a purpose. She needed to know what that purpose was. "I'm offering you a clean exit," Kang said. "Step away from the door. Take the kitchen corridor out to the street. Whatever you saw tonight, you didn't see it. Your record stays buried. You keep your life exactly as it is." Amara was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, in a flat and deliberate cadence, "Delta 7. Compromised at origin." Silence from the corridor. Romano had turned around. Dario's expression didn't change because he didn't know what she had said. But she hadn't said it for them. She had said it for Kang, and the silence on the other side of the door told her that he understood it perfectly. Delta 7 was a tactical designation used exclusively inside the Joint Task Force operation she had served on before her removal. It was internal code, buried code, the kind that only existed in files that were supposed to have been destroyed. The fact that Kang recognized it meant he had access to those files. The fact that he had access to those files meant the syndicate hadn't just paid to have her removed. They had been inside the operation from the beginning. "You knew," she said. "Not a question. Before my report was ever filed. You were already in." Kang did not confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. And in her experience, silence from a careful man was its own kind of answer. "The offer expires in 30 seconds, he said. "Then it expires," Amara said. The door took a hit that was different from the ones before, sharper, more focused, lower on the frame near the hinges. They were shifting tactics, trying the weak points now instead of the center. Dario grunted and adjusted his weight. Amara dropped lower, redistributing her load, and felt the burn return to her left shoulder like an old argument picking up where it had left off. But something else had returned too. Something that had been missing for 3 years. A fierce, clear sense of exactly where she stood and exactly why it mattered. She held the door. She heard the radio crackle before she heard the footsteps. It was the specific, staticky bark of police communication. A sound she had lived inside for 6 years and had spent 3 more trying to forget. It came from the main lounge entrance. Distant but getting closer, and it arrived with the particular confidence of people who expected rooms to rearrange themselves upon their entry. Dario heard it too. His eyes moved to Romano. Romano had already put his phone away. His expression had not changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted, a careful, watchful stillness that told Amara he had not made this call. Whoever had contacted the police tonight, it wasn't the man standing across the room from her, which meant someone else had. The activity at the door had stopped the moment the radio sound entered the building. Kong was listening too. Professionals always listened. She heard the quiet repositioning of feet in the corridor outside, a deliberate withdrawal, not a retreat. They were creating distance, adjusting the scene. By the time the police reached this corridor, there would be 2 sedated guards and 3 men in expensive suits who had simply been trying to locate the restroom. Amara knew exactly how that story would be told. She also knew exactly who would be telling it. "Step back from the door," she said to Dario. He looked at Romano. Romano gave the smallest nod. Dario stepped back. Amara straightened up, rolled her injured shoulder once, and smoothed the front of her uniform with both hands. Then she drew the bolt back herself and opened the VIP door and stepped into the corridor. 2 uniformed officers were at the far end. Behind them, in a gray suit that she would have recognized from twice the distance, was Captain Hendricks. He had put on weight since Detroit. His hair was shorter. Everything else was exactly the same, the broad, easy smile, the relaxed posture that was never actually relaxed. The eyes that moved over a room and cataloged everything while the smile told you he wasn't paying attention. He had been her supervising officer for 4 years. He had been the one who classified her report. His eyes found her, and the smile didn't falter, which was its own kind of tell. A genuinely surprised man's smile faltered. Hendricks had known she was here before he walked through the door. "Officer Johnson," he said, as if 3 years hadn't passed, and her career wasn't sitting in a classified file with his signature on the cover page. "I'm not an officer," Amara said. "You made sure of that." She said it clearly and without heat, the way she would have delivered a situation report. Behind her, she felt Romano move into the doorway. She didn't look back. Hendricks spread his hands in a gesture of practiced patience. "We received a call about a disturbance. Broken glass. Reports of a physical altercation." His eyes moved past her to the corridor, to Kong and his men, standing loosely against the far wall, composed and cooperative, looking like men who had been startled by a noise and nothing more. "These gentlemen say a waitress became erratic and caused a scene. These gentlemen," Amara said, "sedated 2 security personnel and attempted to access a private room to carry out a contracted killing. The guards are in the service alcove and near the fire exit. Both have dart marks on their necks, and their communication equipment has been removed." Hendricks looked at her with the patient, faintly sad expression he had perfected. The one that said you were always like this without saying anything at all. It was the same expression he had worn when he told her, in an office that smelled like burnt coffee, that her report showed a concerning pattern of paranoia. "That's a serious allegation," he said. "I also have a witness," Amara said. She stepped aside. Romano filled the doorway behind her, jacket back on, composed, radiating the specific gravity of a man who had never once in his adult life been without leverage. He looked at Hendricks the way people looked at things they had already decided about. "Captain," Romano said quietly, "I think we should discuss the security footage from tonight's event. All of it. Starting from when your officers entered the building 40 minutes before the disturbance was called in." Hendricks' smile finally did something it never used to do. It slipped. And in the corridor behind her, Amara heard Kong Min-jae begin to move toward the exit with considerably less patience than he had arrived with. "Nobody leaves this floor," Amara said, and her voice carried the full, unburied weight of every year she had spent earning the right to say it. Nobody moved. The corridor held its breath. Kong had stopped moving. The 2 uniformed officers were looking at Hendricks for direction and getting none, because Hendricks was looking at Romano with the expression of a man who had just realized the floor beneath him was not as solid as it had appeared when he walked in. The gray-jacketed third man was still near the fire exit, but his posture had changed, less watchful, more contained. The way people stood when they were deciding between 2 bad options and hadn't chosen yet. Romano let the silence run for a moment the way experienced men did, spending it deliberately, and then he stepped fully into the corridor and spoke to Hendricks in a voice too low for the uniformed officers to catch. "Get your men to secure the guards in the alcove." Do it now, and do it correctly, and we will discuss everything else somewhere quieter. Hendricks moved. He didn't want to. But he did, and the fact that he did told Amara more about the specific nature of his arrangement with Romano than anything she could have uncovered in a file. There were different kinds of corrupt. The kind that served an ideology, the kind that served fear, and the kind that served whoever was currently holding the most weight over their head. Hendricks had always been the third kind. She had just never known whose weight it was. Romano turned to her. "Come inside," he said. Not a request. She followed him back into the VIP room. Dario remained at the door. Romano moved to the table, poured 2 glasses of water from the carafe that was still sitting where the server had left it an hour ago, and set one in front of the chair across from his. He sat down and looked at her with an attention that was different from before. Less guarded, more direct, the kind of look that came after a decision had already been made. "The Johnson case," he said. Amara sat. "You know it. I know it better than you might expect." He turned his glass slowly on the table. 18 months ago, one of my attorneys was reviewing a series of financial transfers connected to a property dispute. Inside that paperwork was a reference to an internal police corruption fund, a pool of money used to absorb and silence specific reports filed between 2019 and 2022. Your report was listed. Your name was listed. Amara was very still. "I had my people look further," Romano continued. "The fund wasn't managed by the precinct. It wasn't managed by anyone in the department at all. It was administered through a shell company registered in Seoul with operational ties to a logistics network used by at least 4 confirmed organized crime entities across 3 countries." He paused. "The same network that contracts Kong Min-jae's services." The room was quiet except for the muffled jazz that was somehow still playing beyond the walls. Indifferent and continuous. Amara placed both hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment. 3 years of mornings waking up in a small apartment with no badge and no purpose and no explanation that made sense suddenly rearranged themselves into a shape she could actually see. The corruption she had reported hadn't been a precinct problem. It hadn't even been a city problem. It had been a thread pulled from something much larger. And when she had pulled it, something much larger had pulled back. "They didn't bury my report because it was inconvenient," she said. "No," Romano said. "They buried it because it was accurate. And because following it would have eventually led investigators to the same network that has been providing services to half the power structures in this city for the last decade. Including," he added, with a directness she respected, "some services provided to people connected to my organization. Before I knew the full picture." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to absolve me," he said. "I'm telling you the complete truth because you have earned it tonight, and because what happened to your career was a specific, deliberate act carried out by people who are connected to the men standing in my corridor." Amara let the weight of it settle. She didn't rush past it. It deserved to be felt. "The evidence," she said finally. "The financial records your attorney found. Where are they?" Romano reached into his jacket and placed a small silver drive on the table between them. "They have been there for 18 months, he said quietly. "I was waiting to find the right person to give them to." He slid the drive across the table. "I believe I have found her." 6 months changed the weight of a room. Amara noticed it every time she walked the perimeter of the Onyx Lounge. The way the staff moved differently around her now. The way conversations adjusted when she entered a space. The way eyes tracked her without quite meaning to. She was the same height she had always been. She wore the same composed expression she had spent years perfecting behind a waitress uniform. But something in the air around her had shifted. The way air shifted around things that had found their correct shape after a long time in the wrong one. She paused at the end of the main corridor and checked her watch. 2200 hours. The lounge was at 3/4 capacity, which was where she preferred it. Busy enough to provide cover, manageable enough to monitor cleanly. Her earpiece gave a soft click. "East entrance is clear," Dario's voice said. "Rotation in 4 minutes." "Hold the rotation by 2, she said. "There's a gray sedan that has cycled the block 3 times in the last 20 minutes. I want eyes on the plate before we move anyone." A pause. "Copy that." She moved down the corridor without hurrying. Hurrying was for people who hadn't planned far enough ahead. She had spent the first 2 months in this role doing almost nothing but planning, mapping every entrance and exit of the building, reviewing 6 months of staff records, restructuring the entire communication system, so that no single compromised person could ever again take down the building's security the way Hendricks and his arrangements had nearly allowed. She had replaced 4 members of Romano's security team. Not because she could prove they were compromised, but because she couldn't prove they weren't. And in her experience, the space between those two things was exactly where disasters lived. Kong Min-jae was in a federal holding facility awaiting trial. The Silver Drive had contained enough financial documentation to connect his operation to 11 separate criminal entities across 4 countries. And when the right people Amara had selected carefully, people whose records she had checked herself, received copies of that documentation. The resulting investigation had moved faster than anyone had expected. Hendricks had been suspended within 3 weeks and arrested within 6. He had not looked at her during the arrest. She had not needed him to. Her report, the one buried 3 years ago in a classified file with Hendricks' signature on the cover, had been officially reopened, reviewed, and validated. Her record had been cleared by a process that was slower and less satisfying than the movies suggested, involving a great deal of paperwork and very little ceremony. She hadn't minded. She had never needed ceremony. She had needed the truth to be on record, and now it was. She stopped at the convex mirror above the kitchen entrance. It showed her the corridor behind her, empty, well lit, exactly as it should be. She looked at it for a moment longer than she needed to, the way you looked at a place where something important had happened, acknowledging it without being held by it. Then she moved on. Romano was in the VIP room. He was there most Thursday evenings, conducting the kind of business that she had learned to see without looking at directly. The way you learn to look at certain things in any complex job. Her role was not to manage his choices. Her role was to ensure that whatever room he was in remained the most secure room in the building, and that anyone who entered it had been evaluated, verified, and cleared by a process that she had designed herself. Nobody sedated her guards anymore. She reached the VIP door and stopped. The brass plate still read private in the same engraved letters. The mahogany was the same dark, polished wood. The handle was the same brass. Everything about the door looked identical to the night she had pressed her back against it with her arms shaking and her shoulder on fire, and her whole buried past rising up through the floor beneath her feet. But she was standing on the other side of it now. She pressed the earpiece. All positions confirmed status. The responses came back one by one, clean and steady. East entrance. West corridor, kitchen access, roof contact, vehicle perimeter. Each voice exactly where it was supposed to be. Each person vetted, trained, and placed there by her hand. She didn't carry a tray anymore. She carried a radio, a cleared record, and the hard-earned knowledge that safety was not a lock that only turned once. In the right hands, it turned every single time.